Thomas Jefferson had an absurd plan to divide America like this. With 10 completely new states, some of which are split up in half by land and water. But America didn't accept this plan, not because of its obvious awkward shapes, but Jefferson's plan was trying to solve a much larger problem. After the United States won the American Revolution, part of the treaty they made with Britain was that Britain would give up all of their territory west of the Appalachian Mountains to the United States. Now, a big problem the United States had was what to do with all this new territory. At the time, after the Revolution, while many of the states were allied, they weren't unified. Many of the states still acted as their own governments. So, initially, many frontiersmen would travel west and claim the territory for their respective states. This led to states like Georgia, North Carolina, Massachusetts, and especially Virginia claiming large amounts of territories for themselves, making the states very disproportionate to one another. This caused tensions with other smaller states that weren't fortunate enough to gain substantial territory, such as Maryland, which didn't accept joining the Union because of the amount of territory Virginia was claiming for itself. That's when Jefferson came into the picture. Jefferson wanted to devise a plan to organize the territory out fairly so that all the states would join the Union. His plan? To create new states in the Land Ordinance of 1784. In this plan, he created several new states that fall along a handful of lines in the Northwest Territory. The first line started at the 45th parallel. Then they would add a new line every 2 degrees south until they reached the 39th parallel. Next, they would add 2 longitude lines. The first runs along the western point of the Kanawha River, with the territory east of said river being one connected state. The second runs along the lowest point of the rapids of the Ohio River, which is along here. Now, the gaps in between these lines is what would make up the states. He even devised names for them, which would be the origins of other future states, such as Michigania, Illinois, and Washington. Now, after all of that, why is Jefferson's plan for the states not as absurd as you might think? Well, if you've seen my last video about how America accidentally made a third Dakota state, where America had a North Dakota, South Dakota, and a third called Lost Dakota, you'll know it's because the maps were highly inaccurate. In the 1780s, the United States didn't have the luxuries of satellites. All they could do was send some frontiersmen out there to draw what they saw, bring their sketches back, and stitch it together. This was the map that Jefferson used when creating his proposal. Already, you can tell how inaccurate it was just by looking at Michigan alone. Later on, the maps did get more precise, with this one being used in the Treaty of Paris, including Jefferson's proposal lines, but everything he planned was based on this original map. However, as inaccurate as it is, it's not the reason why it wasn't approved. The main purpose was to unite all the original 13 states and to prevent all the bickering that was happening between them. Creating new states was the solution, and the lines are arbitrary. It was also implied that these new states could be adjustable. For example, the plan could continue further south to Florida, creating 6 additional states. So the state of Polypsia could have been a more complete square. And even more likely, Saratoga and Polypsia could have been split up by the Ohio River, which would have been nice. And there's no way Congress would have allowed a state to be split in half by Lake Michigan. Most likely, East Michigania would have seceded into Chersonesus. So the proposal didn't fail because of these weird inaccuracies. Why it failed was actually for a handful of other reasons. One thing that Congress had a problem with was making 10 to possibly 16 additional states all at once could create all sorts of problems. They especially didn't like that idea with states that had very low populations, such as the ones far out west. Other politicians believed that creating so many new states would diminish the power of the former 13 states. But the biggest problem that some states had was that Jefferson wrote that there would be an absolute prohibition of slavery by 1800. So when they voted for it, it didn't pass. One major detail that I need to emphasize is that this wasn't the original Constitution. But at the time, the Union was under the Confederation Congress. To pass laws, all states would vote, and that bill would need 7 votes to pass. At the hearing of the original 13 colonies, only 10 were present for voting. Georgia, Jersey, and Delaware didn't have enough representatives to be present for the vote. South Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia voted against it. North Carolina's representatives were divided, so their vote was neutralized, leaving it 6-3, being shy of 1 vote that Jefferson needed. What was even more absurd about it was that if New Jersey was present, historians argued that they would have definitely voted in support of it. But one of the representatives got sick that day and was unable to attend, leaving New Jersey with 2 representatives at the meeting, not enough to cast a vote. So America could have had 16 completely new states and could have diverted the entire Civil War if one guy just got out of bed.
The voice of a single individual would have prevented this abominable crime. Heaven will not always be silent. The friends to the rights of human nature will in the end prevail.
Jefferson was not happy about it, to say the least. But what Jefferson's plan did succeed in was ending the bickering between the states. All the states agreed that creating new states was the best course of action. So many of the states that claimed territory out west began ceding their previous land ownership back to the federal government and started working on new renditions of Jefferson's land ordinance, leading us to the plan that was followed through with the land ordinance of 1787. First, in the new Northwest Territory, there would be at least 3, but a maximum of 5 states from this new territory, as to not diminish the original 13 colonies' power. Next, these territories could be added to the Union as states, once it reaches a minimum population of 60,000 people. This would become the standard for every new territory and new states going forward. Finally, only states formed in the Northwest Territory would be free states, and this unintentionally led to the downfall of the United States and the start of the Civil War, all because of a guy who got sick in Jersey.